The transition from the fabric-covered biplane to the sleek, all-metal monoplane produced some interesting results in the 1930s, and one of these was the Curtiss A-12 Shrike. In 1930, the Army Air Corps was looking for a new attack aircraft to replace the Curtiss A-3 and de Havilland DH-4 biplanes that were operated by their 3rd Attack Group. Though there was a reluctance to transition to the monoplane, with many not wishing to waste money innovating during a time of peace, isolationism, and of course the Great Depression, aircraft performance was increasing with each passing year, and senior officers could not deny the march of progress. In response to an Army request to investigate the possibilities of a monoplane attack aircraft, Curtiss developed the Model 59. The Army approved the design and ordered a prototype to be built as the XA-8. This was a major advance for Curtiss in several respects, being their first monoplane design and the first to have both an all-metal structure and all-metal coverings instead of fabric or wood. But in other ways, the design was still decidedly old school, and it reflected an attempt to balance budgets, available technology, and the conflicting opinions of designers and military officials. Structurally, the aircraft was an innovation. The fuselage was constructed in 2 parts. The rear section was built as a monocoque with duraluminum skin, stringers, and bulkheads. The forward section, beginning in front of the observer's position, was built from welded steel tubing that had 2 heavy struts on each side to support the wing stubs. The engine mount was a separate unit for ease of maintenance, though this too appeared to be made from steel tubing. Attached to the underside of the wing stubs was the aircraft's fixed landing gear. Though at first glance it appeared simple, it was in fact rather complex. The wheel was held by a horizontal jointed yoke which was hinged at the rear to allow the wheel to move up and down. It was possible to latch the wheels in place before takeoff, so that most of them were concealed within the streamlined fairing, and they could then be lowered in flight before landing so that the wheels could better absorb the impact. Though the construction of the fuselage could be considered cutting edge, and the landing gear at least contemporary, the decision to use wire-braced wings was, with the exception of the Douglas O-13 and Boeing P-26, an anachronism not seen since the days of the First World War. But despite this archaic design choice, they were the first Curtiss wings to feature both trailing-edge flaps and full-span leading-edge slats, the latter of which would make the aircraft very popular with its crews due to its low-speed handling. Speaking of the crew, the XA-8 had a crew of 2, a pilot and an observer, who also acted as a rear gunner. The pilot controlled 4 .30-caliber machine guns mounted in the undercarriage fairings, where their rate of fire would not be slowed down by a synchronization gear, and the rear cockpit was fitted with a single .30-caliber machine gun in a flexible mount. Vertical racks mounted behind the cockpit could carry up to 400 pounds, or 181 kilos of bombs, or chemical tanks. In the interest of giving the observer excellent visibility, Curtiss placed the second cockpit quite far to the rear. This not only gave the aircraft some deeply unflattering lines when viewed from the side, but it would also make communication for the crews exceedingly difficult. Upon completion, the XA-8 was fitted with a 600 horsepower liquid-cooled Curtiss Conqueror, the V1570C variant, driving a 3-blade fixed-pitch propeller, and it was flown for the first time in June 1931. Boasting a top speed of 184 miles an hour, it entered into trials against the competing Fokker XA-7. The Curtiss won, and an order was placed for 13 service test models. The first 5 would be built as the YA-8, with the same V1570C engines, and the remaining 8 were ordered as the Y1A-8, with the updated V1570F engine. 11 of these planes joined the 3rd Attack Group at Fort Crockett, Texas, during 1932, and they served alongside the unit's other Curtiss attacker, the A-3B, for about 2 years. Back at Curtiss, the trials had shown that there was still room for improvement, and 2 of the service test aircraft would be kept back for extensive modifications and testing. The first aircraft from the batch was re-engined with a 9-cylinder Pratt & Whitney Hornet radial engine. At the same time, the 13th aircraft was also re-engined, but with a geared version of the Curtiss Conqueror. The Conqueror-powered model was known as the Y1A-8A. Along with boasting an extra 75 horsepower, thanks to the new engine, the aircraft also had a slightly revised wing, though the details of said revision seem to be unknown. Despite the increased power, the modifications to the aircraft added 1/4 of a ton onto the weight, and its top speed dropped slightly to 181 miles an hour. This wasn't enough to dissuade the army though, and owing to the favourable performance of the service test aircraft, an order was placed for 46 as the Curtiss A-8B. Now, this lasted all of 5 minutes, metaphorically speaking, as the testing of the radial-powered YA-8 had gotten underway. Delivered to Wright Field in September 1932, the aircraft was now known as the XYA-10, a new number designation being felt suitable owing to the new power plant. Though, like its competitor, the added weight of modifications reduced the aircraft's top speed, it was considered a more than acceptable price to pay. Many agreed that the radial engine was far more suitable for an attack aircraft, it being more reliable from the points of cooling, and its ability to absorb battle damage. And because of this, the existing order for 46 A8s was superseded by a new order for 46 radial-engined versions instead. Before production got underway, some additional changes were made to the aircraft's design. Some of these were based on field evaluations, and some were based on feedback provided by officers of the 3rd Attack Group. The pilot's cockpit now had just a simple windshield, with many complaining that the sliding canopy was unreliable and reduced visibility. Owing to comments about observers needing to pay postage every time they sent a message to the pilot, the observer station was moved significantly forward, and the engine was changed to the 690 horsepower Wright R1820 Cyclone, which was a much newer engine than the Hornet. These changes were significant enough for Curtiss to redesignate the aircraft as the Model 60, and its production number was also redesignated as the A-12. The first A-12s were delivered in late November 1933. The first 3 of the 46 produced were retained for service testing, 1 going to Wright Field, 1 going to Edgewood Arsenal, and 1 to the Aberdeen Proving Ground, and the rest were delivered to the 3rd Attack Group, with the last arriving on February 20th, 1934. As with many aircraft developed in this period in the United States, the A-12s enjoyed a varied but relatively peaceful service life. Just weeks after their arrival, one of their more notable operations began during the air mail crisis, an event that also involved a couple of other aircraft we've already covered on this channel, and yes, it is eventually getting its own video in the future. Following proven allegations of corruption with the allocation of service contracts, the government suspended the commercial flying of airmail and, without warning, handed the entire responsibility over to the Army Air Corps. Unprepared for such a task, the Air Corps scrambled to get together enough pilots and suitable aircraft to do the job, and the A-12s found themselves being used as impromptu postal aircraft. Operating in the central zone of the air route, 41 A-12s from the 3rd Attack Group would aid in the flying of mail for approximately 3 months. During this time, most of them had their rear cockpits modified to better facilitate the carrying of mail. Some had a lockable cover placed over the canopy for protection, but others had the canopy completely replaced with metal paneling. The airmail crisis unhappily coincided with some of the worst weather seen in decades, with winter refusing to give way to spring. Multiple aircraft were lost due to poor weather, including 2 A-12s, and this forced a reduction of routes and schedules. Other A-12s were also severely damaged during this time, with at least 1 more being written off due to airframe damage. And it was with some relief that their pilots went back to regular service after the embarrassing saga of the airmail crisis had concluded. As the A-12s of the 3rd Attack Group settled down into their peacetime routine of flying exercises and war games, Curtiss were busy working on an export model. This had begun as soon as the last production model had been delivered for the Army. Curtiss advertised the aircraft for a number of roles, allowing for modifications that could see it used as either an attacker, an observation plane, or even as a light bomber. In the end, its curious design, being a halfway house between the old and the new, only secured one customer, China. 10 export models were delivered to the Chinese government in May of 1936, and another 10 were ordered following favourable demonstrations. It only differed from the production variant in two ways. It had a more powerful engine, producing 775 horsepower, and there was provision to have camera equipment installed. The aircraft were assembled at Hangzhou, and the Chinese pilots were trained by an American volunteer, Luke Williamson. It was in Chinese service that the A-12 would see its combat debut, and indeed its only wartime operations. The first reported operations of Shrikes was by the 3rd Attack Group in August of 1937, and this included one of the few reported dogfights including the type, with Chinese A-12s facing off against Japanese D-1As. Numbers are sketchy, but it appears the Shrike scored either 2 or 4 aerial victories against the carrier-based dive bombers during the Battle of Shanghai. Aside from 2 or 3 other actions in October, which appeared to have been ground attack missions, not much is known about the Shrike's performance in Chinese service. Considering none appeared to have survived past January of 1938, said performance was probably lackluster at best, as by this time, the aircraft was certainly being outclassed by those fielded by the Japanese Army and Navy. The Mitsubishi A5M, for example, which was fielded by the Japanese Navy, had a top speed that exceeded the A-12 by 100 miles an hour. Back in the United States, this obsolescence had been observed for some time. The 3rd Attack Group began converting to the Northrop A-17 in late 1936. Due to various accidents, only 35 of the 46 A-12s remained, and 21 of these would eventually wind up in Hawaii. Here, they equipped the 26th Attack Squadron, who, to alleviate the tedium of peacetime training and formation flying, came up with a diverting new exercise. Commanders at Wheeler Field quickly noticed that their aircraft were coming back to base with what appeared to be squiggles on their wingtips. Incredibly bored and incredibly enterprising officers had invented the practice of wingtip signing. One pilot would fly perilously close to another, dip one of his wings down, and the observer in the other aircraft would reach out and sign their name on the wingtip. This was repeated throughout the flight until all aircraft returned to base bearing the name of its companion officers. This was a testament to the monotony of peacetime operations and the complacency of Air Corps doctrine in the Pacific, and it was probably the most exciting thing to happen to the A-12s at Hawaii until the attack on Pearl Harbor. None appeared to have been lost in the attack, for there were only 9 remaining on the island, and these in storage, and the remaining aircraft lived out their days as either trainers or instructional airframes. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and a big thank you, of course, to the patrons. Now that I'm back from my slightly extended break, things should now settle into a more normal routine again until I head overseas in the middle of the year. I've got plans for some long videos, some short videos, and some new video formats as well. More news on that soon. A big thank you, of course, to our Wing Commander tier patrons, our highest tier members. This month's Q&A thread is now live on Patreon for officer tier members too, so be sure to head over there and ask your questions, and they will be answered in the next Hangar debrief. And hopefully there should be some exciting behind-the-scenes stuff being posted on there later on this month. But thank you all so much for your continued support, and I'll catch you all next time. Goodbye.